Today's daf is daf Tezayin, and we'll begin a few lines down from the top, the third line down from the top, Misha Nignaz Ha'aron. Now, the last thing that we discussed was that the fact that the Aron, for a period of time, was under a covering like a temporary roof. And now we're going to talk about other aspects of the Aron. Nignaz, when they, we'll see who actually did this, but when they hid the Aron, they hid together with it Tzinsenes Haman, regarding which the Torah says, Vayomer Moshe al Aaron kach tzinsenes achas, and it says there, L'dorosechem, that Hashem wants the Tzinsenes Haman to be Edus L'mishmeres L'dorosechem, for all generations. And the Gemara in Horios on Daf Yud Beis derives a Gzeirashava Sham Sham, that with regard to the Aron, it says V'no Adati L'cha Sham, and with regard to Tzinsenes Haman, it says V'tein Sham or Shama Malo HaOmer Man Ma Aron Nignaz Af Tzinsenes Haman Nignaz, together with the Aron. Furthermore, Utzluchis Shemen HaMishcha, and a jug of the Shemen HaMishcha. This is derived again in the Gemara in Horios Yud Beis from Gzeir Shava Doros. With regard to Tzinsenes Haman, the Torah says, Hanachos so lifnei Hashem l'shmes lidorosechem. And in Shemen HaMishcha, it says, Shemen Mishchas Kodesh Yel Zeh lidorosechem. And the Gemara derives, Ma Tzinsenes Haman nignaz, af Shemen HaMishcha nignaz. Not only that, but umaklo shel Aaron. The Gemara there in Horios says that it says mishmeres mishmeres. With regard to the Tzinsenes Haman, it says l'mishmeres l'dorosechem. With regard to the makel of Aaron, it says l'mishmeres lios l'bnei Meri. Ma Tzinsenes Haman nignaz af maklo shel Aaron nignaz. Uprachov. Now the Tosi Shonim is wondering why it says pracheha. We know that it was Gomel Shkedim. So from the prachim of the Mate, we have Shkedim. We no longer have Shkedim. So what's the Gniza here on the prachim? And he comes to the conclusion that although a sizable portion of the prachim became shkedim, but lo gamlu shkedim v'nisharu prachim. There were some prachim that remained prachim, and they were hidden together with the shkedim and together with the makel, which was in turn hidden together with the tzlochis of Shemen HaMishcha, together with its Tzinsenes Haman, together with the Aron. So all this was hidden all together within the Aron. The Aga Sheishivu Plishtim Asham Lelokei Yisrael. After the Plishtim returned the Aron that they had capsized in Shmuel Aleph Perek Vav, they added a gift as a kapara in order to quiet down their guilt complex, their Asham complex. And what they did is, together with the Aron, they set up a large box, and inside that argaz, they put klei zav in order to be mechaper for stealing the Aron. When the Aron was put into Gniza, this argaz was placed with it, as the pasuk says, "L'kachtem es Aron Hashem," and it says, "Unesatem oso el hagala v'es klei hazav asher hashivosem lo osham tasimu bargaz mitzido." And from the fact that it says tasimu bargaz mitzido, it means the argaz was situated and placed right next to the Aron. And therefore, whenever you found the Aron, you found this argaz next to it. And when they hid the Aron, they hid this argaz together with it. Mi Gnozo, who actually put the Aron into Gniza? The Gemara answers Yoshio, King Yoshio Gnozo. And why did he do so? Kevon Sherosh Kosuv, the Torah prophesizes at the end of the Chumash. It says, Yolech Hashem Otzcha es Malkecha asher takim alecha el goy asher lo yadato atov avosecha. And the pasuk prophesizes about the period of time in which the people of Israel will be taken out, when a guy will stand and subjugate them. And Yoshio was afraid that maybe they would take the Aron Kodesh with them to Bavel. Amad Ugnaza. Hadod Chsiv, this is testified by the pasuk in Divrei Yomi Beis, Perek Lamed Hey, by Yomer Lalviim Hamvinim L'Chol Yisrael Hakadoshim L'Hashem. And it was told to the Leviim who understood the sanctity and transmitted it to Klal Yisrael, Tnuas Aron HaKodesh B'bayis Asher Bona Shlomo ben David Melech Yisrael, Ein Lochem Masa B'Kotev, Ata Ivdu Es Hashem Elokeichem V'Eis Amo Yisrael. The Aron Kodesh was in its place in the Beis HaMikdash. Why, therefore, is the question, did the pasuk have to emphasize that they should place it in the Beis HaMikdash that was built by Shlomo? It must be that the kavanah was to command the Leviim that they should hide the Aron. Amalem Yoshio said, "Im golehu imachem," if the Aron will go into Golus together with Bnei Yisrael, leBavel, even if at some point will be redeemed from the exile of Babel and the establishment of the government of Bavel will return all the Klei HaMikdash, but nevertheless, they're going to put their eyes on the Aron. They would like the Aron to stay with them, as we saw in the case of the Plishtim who capsized the Aron. And then Ema Temach Zirno Sod L'Mkomo, you'll never be able to carry the Aron back as the law applies. Ella, therefore, Ata now, Ivdu es Hashem Elokeichem v'Eis Amo Yisrael, fulfill this service of God and on behalf of the people of Israel, and hide the Aron. Now, once we mentioned that the tzluchis of the Shemen HaMishcha was hidden together with the Aron, the Gemara now brings a number of brisos regarding the manufacture of the Shemen HaMishcha. Pitum Shemen HaMishcha Ketzad Hu Nasa. How did they prepare the Shemen HaMishcha? What was the Masechet Shemen HaMishcha, the formulation of this oil that was used to anoint? So the Brisa quotes Psukim at the end of Sefer Shmos with regard to the Samamonim, and there it says, "Ve'ata kach lecha b'samim rosh mar dror tamesh meos v'kinamon bosem besem machziso chamishim masayim uknei bosem chamishim masayim." And then the pasuk says, "V'kida chamesh meos b'shekel hakodesh v'shemen zayis hin." And according to this pasuk, it's clear that the kamus, the volume of the samamonim, is equal to elef v'chamesh meos monim, 1,500 monim. Now the pasuk says shemen zayis hin, and what is the volume of hin? Shnei masar lok. It's equal to 12 lok. Shebo sholkim es ha'ikarin. They would cook in a hot pot, hot water, the roots of these besamim. That's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Sholkan Haya B'mayim. They would take the besamim and they would cook it in water in order that the besamim should now absorb some of the water. And that would mean that the besamim now are expanded. And as a result, it would minimize the amount of blia of the shemen. In other words, we don't want the besamim, says Rabbi Yehuda, to absorb too much of the oil because we need a larger volume of oil to anoint. We'll see soon the entire list of who has to be anointed and what has to be anointed with the shemen HaMishcha. So in order to guarantee that the besamim would not absorb too much of the oil, they first soaked and even cooked the besamim in water. And once the besamim were saturated with water, they no longer would absorb the shemen. V'nosein shemen al gabeah, on top of the samimonim, they poured the shemen so that now the shemen would absorb the reach, the beautiful fragrance of the besamim. And mishahaya koledis hareach, once the shemen absorbed the fragrance of the besamim, then the shemen ayamaviro, he would take the shemen from the besamim, remove the shemen from on top of the besamim. Kiderech shahapatomim osim. These are the expert, well-trained manufacturers of shemen hamishcha. And now they would place the shemen into a bowl, and that's what the pasuk means at the end of Sefer Shmot. It says, "V'asiso so shemen mishchas kodesh, rokach mirkachas ma'aser rokeach shemen mishchas kodesh yir." Now, at this point in the sugya, we need to introduce a Gemara in Krisus on Daf Hey. There are two opinions there about this concept of cooking the besamim in water before you add the shemen. There's one Mandiam, one opinion has it that immediately, without delay, they would cook the besamim together with the shemen. And there was no need to go through an introductory preliminary process of cooking the besamim in water. Now, the Gemara objects to that opinion, raises the obvious objection, because if this be the case, then we're not going to end up with enough shemen, because the besamim are going to absorb the shemen. And the shemen was all told shnei mesrei lug. It wasn't the mass volume of oil. The Samamonim themselves, if you remember, were 1,500 monim. So that means that the shemen would be completely absorbed by the besamim. And if that be the case, they certainly could not cook the Samamonim with such a small volume of shemen that would be left over. So the Gemara therefore answers in Masechet Krisus that we have no choice but to assume that there was a Maaseh Nes, there was some sort of miracle happened with regard to the manufacture of the shemen HaMishcha. And that's the only way we could say that even if they cooked the besamim together with the shemen still remained whole. It was not absorbed by the besamim. Funny Rabbi Yehuda, Bei Rabbi Eloi, Rabbi Yehuda taught us a brisa. Shemen HaMishcha she'asa Moshe b'Midbar ma'aser nisim na'asa bo mitchilu v'ad sof. We're going to see that there was a very limited amount of shemen, and it was certainly diminished, and yet that shemen was used in so many ways for anointing. The total volume of this liquid oil is 12 lug. That's not a lot. Shenemar Sheven Zais Hin. A hin is equal to 12 lug. Now, if we're going to talk about the diminishing of the shemen, of this 12 lug shemen, losach bo asa ikrid, because we now have the roots of the besamim, they're going to absorb the shemen. Lohaya bo sipe. Certainly, the shemen that would remain would not be of a volume that would be sufficient enough for the purposes of the shemen hamishcha. Valachas kama v'kama, and how much more so that there wouldn't be enough oil when they started cooking the oil together with the besamim. So we have to assume that the shemen, based on the laws of nature, would become diminished. And not only that, she'ur bolea. We know that when you burn something and cook something, that itself causes it to diminish, to shrivel. Furthermore, ha'etzim bolim, the roots of the spices themselves will absorb some of the oil. Vayore bolas, and the large container or pot where they cooked it, that the walls of the pot would also be saturated with some of the oil and diminish some of the oil. Umimenu nimshachu, and look what the oil had to achieve. Number one, Meshichas HaMishkan. They did a Meshicha on the Mishkan. Number two, on the Kalim. Number three, on the Shulchan and Kalim. The Menorah and Kalim. Umimenu nimshachu Aaron, Cohen, Gadol, Banav, Kol Shivas Yimei HaMiluim. On every day of the days of Miluim, that week of preparation before Aleph Nisan, before they erected the Mishkan, they, on a daily basis, were Moshech Aaron Ubana. And the 7 days of Miluim, the Torah says, Shivas Yomim Yemalias Yedchem. And this phrase, Milui Yodayim, refers to putting on the Bigdei Kahuna. And the Torah says, Ubigdei Kodesh Asher Li Aaron Yu Lebodav Achrav Lemoshcha Behen Ulemali Bom Es Yodam. So that Aaron and Banav had to put on their Bigdei Kahuna every day during all 7 days of Miluim, and they had to be anointed with Shemen HaMishcha on each of the 7 days. And that's derived from the Smichos HaPsukim, because immediately following the pasuk of Bigdei HaKodesh Asher Lebanov, it immediately says, Ulamali Bana Ulamali Bam Es Yadam, which is a reference to anointing with Shemen HaMishcha. Umimeni nimshchu kohanim gedolim u'malachim. All generations were the kings, and the Kohen Gadol was always anointed with the Shemen HaMishcha of Moshe Rabbeinu. So this was all a great miracle, that there would be such a volume of Shemen HaMishcha. Now, at this point, the Gemara wants to analyze the halacha and the scope, the application of the requirement of Meshicha b'Shemen HaMishcha with regard to a Melech b'Yisrael. Melech b'Tchila, if a person is appointed king and his father was not the king, he didn't inherit the kingship, on Meshicha, he will always, as an absolute requirement, require Meshicha. Melech ben Melech, however, if a king inherits the Melucha from his father, ein ton Meshicha. There's no need for Meshicha b'Shemen HaMishcha. The Gemara is going to derive this from Sukkim. And if, by the way, there's no need for Shemen HaMishcha, it's not even an option, because then it would be Me'ilah. My timer, From whence do we derive this halacha? And the answer is from David Amelech. In Shmuel Aleph, Perek Tezayin, it says, Kum mashcheu ki zehu. The Gemara says the word zeh is a teaching, and zeh is always a miut. Zeh, meaning David Amelech, since his father was not the king, he did not inherit the melucha, ton Mashiach. The ein beno ton Mashiach. However, his son, in this case Shlomo Melech, would not require Mashiach. Later, the Gemara is going to explain why in fact Shlomo Melech was anointed with the Shemen HaMishcha. Avol Kohen Gadol Pen Kohen Gadol. There's no such thing as inheritance with regard to the office of the high priest. Afilu ad asara doros ton Mashiach. And this is derived from a pasuk by Yikra Vav, V'hakohen HaMashiach tachtov mibanov, emphasize the word Mashiach, and it could have said Hakohen tachtov mibanov. Why did the Torah add that redundant word HaMashiach? To teach us that even the son of the Kohen Gadol needs Mashiach. And regarding the son of a Kohen Gadol, if he takes over his father's position after his father passes on, the Torah writes, V'hakohen HaMashiach tachtov mibanov, and the word Mashiach was added to teach us that the Kohen Gadol, when he's succeeded by his son requires anointing. And if he is not anointed, he does not become the Kohen Gadol. And this is all derived in the sugya in Horios and also parallel sugya in Masechet Kresos. V'kulam kayam li'asid love. In other words, we're going back to the Shemen HaMishcha of Moshe Rabbeinu. All of it will remain intact for the benefit of the third Beis HaMikdash. Hadod Ksiv, as the pasuk says in Shmos Perek Lamed, it says Shemen Mishchas Kodesh Yezel li lidoro secha. And again, the extra word zeh, and zeh is 7 plus 5 is 12. And this gematria of the word zeh teaches us that those 12 lug of Shemen HaMishcha will be kayomim lidorot secha. Zeh li lidorot secha. And that means for the door of the Migdash HaShlishi. Sheibana b'meir of Yomi. Ein moshchin melachim el al gavei hamayon. The location for Mashiachas Melech is a spring. A spring has constant water, non-stop. And that's a Simon Tov. It's a good Simon, and it inspires the new Kohen, the new Melech. Number one, to rule his people faithfully, and also to thank God for having chosen him. So the Mayon is very inspirational. And Shenevar, how do we know that this is the location for Mashiachas Melech? Vayomer Melech, Poskim Malachim Aleph, Perek Aleph, K'u imochem es avdei adonechem v'kavtem es Shlomo b'ni al hapirda. So they're going to ride Shlomo while he's on top of a mule, asher li, v'oradatem oso al Gichon, and bring him down to the waters of Gichon, u'machach oso sham tzadok hakohen. And there Tzadok HaKohen did the anointment of Shlomo as king, V'nasan HaNavi, and not only did the Kohen Gadol participate, but also the Navi, in this case Nasan, participated. And Mashach also al Yisrael, he should become Lamelech al Yisrael. And then they blew the shofar, and they all cried out, Yechi HaMelech Shlomo. So we see that Mashiachas Malachim requires the Mayon, and that is the Simon Tov. The Brisa continues, Ein mochchin melech ben melech. There is only one situation in which even a king who is appointed as an heir to the throne, nevertheless he requires Mashiach b'Shemen HaMishcha. If there's a machlokes b'Yisrael, if there's some objection, there's another contender who claims that I am the king and not him. In that case, the Malchus doesn't pass on by inheritance automatically. We need a Mashiach. The Yerusha dimension of Malchus is not going to be sufficient. And the Gemara in Horios derives this from a pasuk in the parsha of Shoftim. It says, "Laman yarich yomim al mamlachto hu bana b'kerev Yisrael," and it indicates that only if there's b'kerev Yisrael, which means Shalom b'Yisrael, all are in agreement that this son should inherit his father's melucha. So it goes smoothly in inheritance from father to son, and then we don't need Mashiach. So the Gemara says, Mipnei ma nimshach Shlomo. After all, Shlomo was the son and inherited the Malchus from his father David. Mipnei machletoso shel Adonio. Adonio declared Ani Emloch. Yoash, who is the son of Achaziah, he was also anointed. And why is that? Even though he was a Ben Melech, and he was the son of Achaziah. Mipnei Asalyahu. Asalyahu destroyed the Zerah Melucha, and he started praving Melucha. And Yehoachaz was also anointed. He was the son of Yoshio. And the pasuk indicates that Yehoachaz was anointed. And the answer is, even though he was the Ben Melech, he was the son of Yoshio. Nevertheless, Mipnei Yehoyakim Achiv, he had an older brother by the name of Yehoyakim, and he claimed, this Yehoyakim, that I should be the first to be appointed as a king. Why are you skipping over me and appointing Yehoachaz as my younger brother? Another case of a Melech ben Melech who needed anointment is Yehu. And this is a pasuk in the 9th chapter, Malachim Beis. It says, Ubasa Shama, Ure'esham Yehu ben Yoshaphat. So Yehu is the son of the king, Yoshaphat. And the Tanakh testifies that Lokachta Pach Hashemen, we'll see what the significance of the word Pach here is, the Atzakta al Rosho, the Amarta Ko Omar Hashem Mishachticha Lemelech El Yisrael. So even though Yehu was a son to Yoshaphat, he was a Melech ben Melech, nevertheless he required Mashiach. And why? Mipnei Yoram, the son of Achav, who declared himself as Melech, and he sort of vied to steal the Malchus from Yehu. The Gemara now has a question about Mashiach B'Shemen HaMishcha. Here's the Gemara's kasha. Lochein Ksiv, does it not say in Shmuel Aleph Perek Tezayin, Kum Mashcheu Kizehu? And we're going to darshan the extra word Zeh as a miut. Zeh on Mashiach, Ve'en Malchi Yisrael to Unim Mashiach. This entire requirement to Mashiach only applies to Melech Mi Beis David, but not to Melech Yisrael, Malchi Yisrael. And therefore, how could it be that they were Moshech Yehu? Yehu was Mimalche Yisrael. He was not a descendant of David. And that would be a violation of Yisur Me'ilah, because Ein Malche Yisrael Tuna Mashiach. Elo. So Gemara says, let's explain this brisa. And it's not referring to Shemen HaMishcha. That's not what the brisa has in mind as far as Mashiach. Yo Achiz, Mipnei Yo Yakim, Achiv, Shaigal Menishtei Shanim. How do you interpret this brisa that Yehoachaz required Mashiach, and we thought it was Shemen HaMishcha because Yehoyakim, who was older than him, was claiming the Melucha? How are you going to tell me that Yehoachaz was Nimshach Shemen HaMishcha? That doesn't make any sense. Why? Lo Yoshayo Gnazo. Already his father Yoshio had put the Shemen HaMishkan to Gniza. So it would be impossible to say that when the Brisa says Yoachaz was Nimshach, it meant B'Shemen HaMishkan. It was already B'Gniza. So Hada Amra, therefore we have no choice but to say that with regard to Yoachaz, Be'afar Simon Nimshach, V'lo B'Shemen HaMishkan. And we're going to apply that same logic that we apply to Yehoachaz to the case of Yehu. And it wasn't the Shemen HaMishcha, it was Shemen HaFarsimon, which I think in English is called balsam. Ein mochken HaMalachim Elam Keren. If we want the Malchus to remain permanently in the hands and in the lineage of that Melech, then we should take the Shemen HaMishcha out of a Keren. A Keren is a shofar, and that's a Simon Tov that the Malchus would be Miskayim Ke Keren. Keren is always an example, a paradigm of something that's Miskayim, that will last forever. And we find in a Brisa that Shaul, and you know that the Malchus of Shaul did not last. There the Torah says, Vayikach Shmuel es hapach, es pach Hashem. It doesn't say that it was Keren. Or for example, Yehu. There also, the pasuk says, "V'lakachta pach Hashem v'yatzakta al rosha." Is Nimshechu, both Shaul and Yehu were anointed in a pach, and therefore Hoisa Malchusa Malchus Overis. Their Malchus did not remain within their progeny, within their generations. Now, with regard to David, on the other hand, the Torah says, "Vayikach Shmuel es Keren Hashemen." And with regard to Shlomo HaMelech, it says, "Vayikach Tzadok HaKohen es Keren Hashem." Nimshechu min HaKeren, v'hoisa Malchusa Malchus Kayemes. And their kingship, since the Mashiach was from a Keren, and as we said before, the Keren is a Simon Tov of Dovar HaMiskayim, therefore, their Malchus was a Malchus HaMiskayemes. Ein Moshchim Kohanim Melachim. The Torah says that Malucha is given to Shevet Yehuda, not to Shevet Levi, and therefore the Kohanim cannot be anointed as kings. Rabbi Yehuda, he came from Anton Dairia, that's the name of a place. Al Shem, and this fulfills what Yaakov Avinu at the end of Sefer Bereshit Vayichi says, "Al Yosser Shevet Yehuda." The word Shevet here is a reference to the Srara, to Malchus, and it will never deviate from Shevet Yehuda. However, if we find that there was a melech from another Shevet, that's not really called Mahod Malchus. That's not yet essentially Malchus. That's just a shofet or a shoter. It's a temporary kind of leadership role. And when it says here in Moshe and Kohanim Malachim, of course, it means any of the Shvatim other than Yehuda. But he singles out Kohanim because it's a special chiddush that even though Kohanim are Re'uyim, Mitzad Atzmon, they should be Roy to Shemen HaMishcha. But nevertheless, Ein Moshe Osam L'Shem Malchus, and how much more so with regard to Shar Shvat. Rab Chia bar Ada, not only are we enjoined from appointing Malachim and other Shvatim as kings, but moreover, there's a special reason in Kohanim why we should not appoint them as kings, because it says in the Pasuk in Shoftim, it says, Laman Yarich Yomim Al Mamlachtohu Banav B'Kerev Yisrael. And immediately afterwards, Maksiv Basrei, it says, Lo Yiyah LaKohanim Alevim Kol Shevet Levi Chelik V'Nachla. So the contiguity of these two psukim is coming to teach us that Shevet Levi does not get a Chelik V'Nachla in Malchus. Forget about it in the territories on the division of the land of Israel. How much more so they shouldn't be appointed as Malachim, which is going to lead us to a whole sugi elsewhere about the Chashmonoim. In any event, we had a brisa that we brought earlier that Yehoiachaz, the son of Yoshio, was anointed because Yoakim, who was older than him by 2 years, was claiming the Malchus. And the Gemara quotes from Yochanan in this regard. The pasuk in Divrei Yomim says, "Uvnei Yoshiyahu habachar Yochanan," and then it says, "Hasheni Yehoyakim, Hashlishi Tzidkiyo, Haravi Shalom." So when we read this pasuk and translate it literally, it seems that Yoshiyahu had 4 sons. On Rabbi Yochanan, no, that's not how we read the pasuk. Who Yochanan? The Bachar that's mentioned here, and it says Habachar Yochanan, Hu Yahoachas. He is Yahoachas. Now, Yahoachas is mentioned elsewhere, not in Divrei Yomim, but in Malachim Beis Perkav Gimel, and he is identified as Yoachaz ben Yoshia. So that Yoachaz in Sefer Malachim is the same as Yochanan in Sefer Divrei Yomim. So when we ask for Ksiv HaBachar Yochanan, if it's Yoachaz, we just finished saying that Yoakim was 2 years older than Yoachaz. So how could the Bachar Yochanan be Yoachaz? Rabbi Yochanan's statement, it makes no sense. So my answer is Bechar la Malchus. That really Yoakim was older than Yoachaz. In Divrei Yomim, the Torah, the pasuk refers to Yoachaz as the Bechar when really Yoakim was the Bechar. The answer is Bechar la Malchus. In other words, he got the Malchus before Yoakim. On Rabbi Yochanan, on this pasuk it says Hashlishi Tzidkiyo Aravi Shalom. Who Shalom? Who Tzidkiyo? They're all the same person. So in essence, here we're talking about not 4 sons, because 2 of the sons that are listed here are really the same person, and that Shalom is called Chizkiyo. Tzidkiyo. V'aksiv Ashlishi Tzidkiyo v'Ravi Shalom. You see that they're 2 separate people, 2 different people. And the Gemara answers that the intention of this pasuk is for 1 person with shlishi litolados. Yoakim was the Bechar. The next one was Yochanan, who is really Yoachaz, and the third one is Tzidkiyo, and he is Shalom, and he was Revi Lamalchus. Okay, there's a long discussion about this here. We just simply are running out of time. So if miraculously we get more time, Tzidkiyo, why was he called Tzidkiyo? When in fact his name was Shalom. Shetzidek Olav Midas Hadin. As we'll soon see, Tzidkiyo suffered beyond comprehension, and yet he accepted divine justice. Shalom, Shebiyamav Sholma, Malchus Beis David. He was the last of the kings of Malchus Beis David. Therefore, Shalom Milashon Nishlama. And the Brisa says, Lo Shalom Havishmei Velo Tzidkiyo Havishmei. None of these names are really his names. Ela Matanya, that's his name. Hadod Ksiv, Apostle Malachim Beis, Vayamlech Melech Bavelas Matanya. Dodo Tachtov Vayasif Es Shmo Tzidkiyo. Now, the Torah tells us that we have to make an aron of atzei shitim, and it should be amosayim v'chetzi arko, 2 amos and a half in length, v'ama v'chetzi rochbo, and 1.5 amma in width, and amma v'chetzi komasa, 1.5 amma in its height. And we're going to use the tefach to figure out the dimensions of the aron. And keep in mind, the aron functioned as the house for the luchos, and we're going to have to figure out whether the dimensions of the aron were appropriate, they fit the size of the luchos. So we're going to have to understand the size of the aron, the length and the width. We're going to have to understand the size of the luchos. Now, in terms of the relationship between tefach and the amma, there are three possibilities. One is that 5 tefachim equal an amma. The other is that 6 tefachim equal an amma. And then we have another category of an amma, which is 6 tefachim plus another chatzi etzba. But the amma beinanis, the middle of the three categories, is shisha tefachim. Which of these amos, reflecting on the different sizes based on the tefachim, are indicated by the pasuk of the aron? In other words, how do we measure the aron? And here we're going to have a machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yochanan is going to explain the shita of Rabbi Meir, and Reish Lakish is going to explain the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. There's no machlokas here. Each one, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, are explaining a different shita in the machlokas Tanoim. So Rabbi Yochanan is going to explain the shita of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yochanan bi ama beinanis shel shisha tefachim haya aron asu. Mantana, what shita amongst the Tanoim does Rabbi Yochanan reflect? The ama shel shisha tefachim, Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Yehuda is going to disagree. Tisnan, we have a Mishnah in Masechet Shekalim. Rabbi Meir Omer Kol ha'amos, all the amos of the Mikdash hayu b'beinanis. And the Rash Soleo has a different, an additional state. He says chutz mizbeach hazav va'keren va'sove va'yisod. But as a general rule for our purposes today, Rabbi Meir identifies the amma in the Mikdash as an amma beinis of 6 tefachim. And that includes the shulchan and menorah and the structure, wherever the word amma appears. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda makes a fundamental distinction. And he says there are two categories. There's amos binyan, which means when we're talking about the structure of the Mikdash, or for example, the Mizbeach HaChitzon, which was attached permanently to the ground, then we're talking about Shisha Tefachim. But Shekalim, those parts of the Mikdash, like the Shulchan and the Menorah, or the Aron, or the Mizbeach HaZav inside the Heichal, which were not permanently attached to the Karka, so therefore they don't have the halacha of binyan, they have a halacha of Kalim Chamisha. The Amma is 5 tefachim. So now we're going to have machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda in our context regarding the Aron. Was the Amma that the Torah describes of the Aron 6 tefachim, that's Rabbi Meir, or 5 tefachim, that's Rabbi Yehuda? Al daiti the Rabbi Meir di Omar, du Omar, di Omar. The Amma shel shisha tefachim haya Aron asui is then Orko shel Aron is chamesha sar tefachim, because the Torah speaks about Amma v'chetzi Orko. So an Amma v'chetzi is going to be the equivalent of Amasayim v'chetzi. Sorry, I apologize. Amasayim v'chetzi, that's 2 amos and a half, is equal to 15 tefachim, because we talked about an amma of 6 tefachim. So 2 amos is 12 tefachim. Another half an amma is 3 tefachim. 12 is 12 plus 3 is 15 tefachim. Amsa ashita v'amsa ashita upalgus amsa tlos. The arba luchos hoyuba. Now each set of luchos, the first luchos which were broken, and the second set of luchos, which were shlemos, were all placed into the aron. This reflects the sheet of the Chachamim that there was only one aron. So there were basically 4 tablets that were housed in the aron. Shnaim shlemim, shnaim shvurim, dichsiv, v'yachtov al haluchos advarim asher hoyu al luchos rishonim asher shibarta v'samtem ba'aron. There's only one aron, and asher shibarta, the luchos rishonos, the shivrei luchos, were also placed in the aron. Al luchos. Now let's get the size of the luchos and figure out relative to the size of the aron in Rav Meir's frame of reference How do they fit in the luchos, 4 luchos into the aron? Hayakol echad v'echad, each one of the luchos, arko shisha tfachim, and rachbo shisha. So it means that the rochav of each of the luchos was 3 tfachim, and therefore the shleimim had 2 luchos. That's 2 times 3 tfachim is 6 tfachim. And when you talk about the shivrei luchos, likewise, they were 6 tfachim. And if you place them one next to the other, nimtza orech hakol shisha tfachim, rochav hakol shnei masar tfachim. So the rochav we said was shlosha tfachim, and now we're going to multiply that by 4. Is 4 times 3 is 12 tfachim. Nimtza ein arkam shaluchos li arko shel aron. Right, the total length of the luchos, each one was 3 tfachim, is 4 times 3 is 12, and the aron we came to the conclusion 2.5 amma according to the amma beinanis in Rabbi Meir's reference equals 15 amma. Is the shtayr sham shlosha tfachim? I'm sorry, 15 tfachim. So if you have 12 tfachim for the luchos that were placed in the aron, and you have a length of 15 tfachim, you're left with 3 tfachim spare. And now we're going to turn to Tezayin Amud Beis. Again, Rabotai, this is an impossible task to fit this entire. Again, I can just read but just to try to explain it,